Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the Divine Reality course. We are continuing with the section on why Allah deserves worship. And now we're going to look at the fourth reason, which is to do with self-love. Self-love leads to loving God. Now, this is a very powerful point that was made by Imam al-Ghazali. He said, if you love yourself, then you must love God, right? And this is not referring to the type of sort of narcissistic self-love where you're so besotted by yourself and lost in and of yourself that you can't think about anything else, to the degree where you're almost worshipping your physical self. This is a type of, we're referring to a normal type of, mature self-love that everyone should have, and self-respect from this perspective. And the point here is that if you love yourself, then how could you not love the one that created this self? Remember, Allah created us. Allah is the one that created us. He created our souls. He created our consciousness. He created our personality. So if we love ourselves, then how could we not love the one that put us together, literally, created us, brought us into existence? So this is another very powerful point you can share. The fifth point is, God is the most loving. He's Al-Wadud. He is the forgiving, as Allah says, He is the forgiving, the loving, in the 85th chapter of the Quran, verse 14. And Allah's love is the purest form of love. It's not a love which is contingent or dependent. Unlike, for example, love that we experience and we share as created beings. I mean, one would argue that the purest form of love is the mother's love in this world. Yet even the mother's love is a dependent type of love. The mother needs to love, because if she doesn't, it will cause her pain. So it's out of need that one loves as human beings. But Allah's love is free of need. It's perfect, it's without deficiency, without any flaws, as we mentioned already. So how could we, again, not love the most loving? As the Prophet ﷺ has told us, this is narrated in Abu Dawud, he said, God is more affectionate to His servants than a mother is to her children. I mean, again, we can't ever completely comprehend the love of God. It's beyond us. But we can, to a degree, appreciate that, okay, we can understand the love of a mother, which one would argue is the greatest form of love within this created world. Now, God's love is greater, far greater than the love of a mother. I mean, just knowing that leads you want to love this creator of ours, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although we can never fully comprehend the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Point number 6, or the sixth reason, we're natural born worshippers. It's a part of our fitrah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, chapter 51, verse 56, I did not create the jinn kind or mankind except to worship me. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That Allah did not create us for any other reason except to worship Him. That is the reason we were created. So it's a part of our nature to want to submit to something and to worship something. All that's happened throughout history is that the innate desire to submit to something and to worship something has shifted from the divine to something material and ephemeral. That's all that's happened. Whereas a few centuries ago, throughout history, people, although they had their own distorted conceptions of God, and they may have, whatever the case was, but you could see in our history that people, human beings, had an object of worship. Every human civilization has had an object of worship. Some were closer to the true understanding, some veered away. When the prophets from Allah came, all of the Anbiya, when they came, they came to bring their people back to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was the focus. But over time, shaitan, took people one step at a time away from this pure worship, got them to make statues and idols and all of these types of things. But the point here is, whatever they were worshipping, they were expressing this nature. They were finding an object to worship, and they were worshipping an object. And historically speaking, it was a higher being. But in more recent modern times, it's been more material things. In most cases, it's either been falling into the worship of this dunya, this world, under the pretense of worldly progress, material progress, hedonism, materialism, submitting to the material world itself, or it's been submitting to one's own self and one's own desires. We'll expand upon this in a second. But the point here is that it's to worship is to do what is natural to the human being. So we were created to worship, so why not worship the creator of everything as opposed to created things? The seventh point is obeying God is most rational. Allah says in the Quran, chapter 3, verse 132, and obey God and the Prophet so that you may be given mercy. Understanding now who Allah is, that He is the creator, understanding He created us for a purpose, and understanding that if we were to fulfill that purpose, that only then will we be successful in this life and the hereafter. Therefore, it's rational to worship God. You know, even just purely from a rational perspective, it makes sense to worship God if you want to be successful. And just to expand upon the point we made earlier, everyone worships. Everyone is submitting to something and worshipping something. You cannot escape this, right? I believe it was Martin Ling who said, man cannot not worship, right? It's a very powerful quote. Man cannot not worship. It's a part of our nature. Allah says in the 45th chapter of the Quran, verse 23, have you not seen the one who takes his own desires, you know, as a Lord, as a God? This is a very powerful point, because look, the most extreme type of atheist, hedonist, nihilist you'll find today will turn around and say, well, I don't submit to anything. I don't worship anything. I do what I want to do. That I'm free. I do what I want to do. But the poor chap forgets to, or fails to realize that when he says, I do what I want to do, he's actually submitting to his own lower self, his own desires. Whatever his desires call him to, whatever that inner instinctual, animalistic voice calls him to, he will do, or she will do. So that's submitting to oneself, and it's one of the worst types of slaveries. But the delusion is, well, I'm free. Well, you're not free, you're submitting to yourself. Everyone is submitting to something or the other. Every single human being, as soon as we're born into this world, into this reality, and we become aware, every human being is in slavery, in a state of slavery. So from an Islamic perspective now, I mean, if you truly want to be free, if you truly want to be liberated, the only way to do that is to submit yourself to your Creator, to submit yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because only when you submit yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are you truly free from the whole world and everything else, everything created. You're no longer a slave to these ephemeral things, these material things. You're no longer a slave to another person, an ideology, the material world, yourself. You have freed yourself from all of these different types of slaveries and all the other types of slaveries that are out there. Why? Because now you've chosen to submit to Allah alone. When you submit to Allah alone and you worship Allah alone, you are no longer a slave of anything else. And in actual facts, you are liberated through slavery, a type of slavery, but this slavery is submission to the Creator of the heavens and the earth. And that from a worldly perspective is true freedom. You can't find it anywhere else. You will never find it anywhere else. Allah also says in the 39th chapter of the Quran, verse 29, God puts forward an illustration. Can a man who has several partners for his master, of which they are at odds with each other, be considered equal to a man devoted wholly to one master? All praise belongs to God, though most of them do not know. Now think about this situation as a powerful illustration. Imagine a man has several masters. A person has several masters, people controlling him. They're at odds with each other. They're in disagreement with each other. And what does that mean? That means that that person is going to be pulled in every single direction. What would the state of such a person be? A slave of many masters, compared to a person who has only one master. You can't compare the two people. And also now think about the one that submits himself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, whose master is Allah, the creator of the heavens and the earth alone. You can't compare that person's situation to anyone else's situation. But it's one thing understanding this, brothers and sisters, it's another thing really internalizing this and living by this, allowing it to change you. Okay, I'm saying I'm submitting to Allah. Now, just as a concept, it's not good enough just to say, yeah, I submit to Allah. And then you go and the way you live is you still are submitting to X, Y, and Z. It's not good enough. We need to actualize this. If to be an honest human being, what it dictates now is now you live by this reality. That's what's going to make your life meaningful and significant. You live by the understanding that you are to worship Allah alone, and that means you try your level best to worship Allah alone in every way, shape or form. You try your level best, your hardest to remain as far away as you can from shirk and associating partners from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, you live in an upright way. You try to live according to the dictates of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as outlined in the Quran and the Sunnah. Now, that is now living a meaningful life, a wholesome life, a life which is fulfilling its true purpose, which is to worship Allah alone. So brothers and sisters, we're going to stop here, and in the next session, we're going to just touch upon a few contentions that people may raise to the whole idea of God creating us to worship Him, and then we'll finish off on some concluding remarks, inshallah. So when you're ready, move on to the next section.